Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Game Telecom video we're going to be discussing both Microsoft's follow-up to the Scorpio. That's right, the successor to the Scorpio is already being planned by Microsoft, and also the NX, because Nikkei Trendy have had an interview with Shinya Takahashi, who is the general manager of Nintendo Entertainment and Planning and Development. Now, during this interview, a couple of very key points were raised, and I will link to the interview. It is in Japanese, but if you fancy maybe using Google Translation or what have you, then you can by all means read it. Now, I'm going to read out a short quote. I can't talk about this in detail yet, but we are aiming so that neither people who like games nor mums dislike it. I think that I want to release a game device that both customers who have had much experience in gaming and customers who haven't played much can enjoy greatly. And rather interestingly, there was a comment about software development for the NX. And what they want to do is to avoid issues with development time and shortages and issues with the actual development process. We are paying attention to that. Having said that, it isn't drastically increasing the amount of development staff. To be specific, software development teams and teams that create the development environments are thinking about the NX lineup together. For example, a software development team may have a request as if we had this library, then development would progress quickly. Teams creating the development environment respond to that by considering if we prepare a environment like this, then development will be smoother, and they actually discuss with development teams and hear their opinions and prioritize those things. We have built a stronger cooperative relationship compared to what it was before, and making efforts so that software can develop smoothly. End quote. There are a multitude of different ways that you can certainly take the first quote, which was games and mums will both like the system, and it sounds a little bit like the Wii, and I have been reading on message boards and getting a general consensus of what people like, and some people are excited, but there is a lot of concern because for most, and obviously your mileage may vary because the original Wii did have some good games on it, for most people would argue that the Wii was Nintendo's biggest misstep, although some would also argue it was the Wii U, so I guess it depends. But for many, the fact that the Wii was a lot less hardcore than the N64 or the SNES before it, well, we're going to have to see, because there's so little information on what Nintendo are even planning with the NX. But regarding the development environment, it makes a lot of sense. Basically, when developers, that would be game developers, are creating games, they want libraries. And libraries are basically, in the simplest terms, pre-made applications or pre-made shortcuts for developers so that they can implement things. A lot of game engines now use libraries, or programming languages use libraries, and SDKs are also very similar. So, for example, it will be memory management or graphics libraries, so that you can easily accomplish tricks without the programmers of the game needing to do this from the ground up. And it was a very, very, very big problem back in the N64 era, as people who have studied the N64/PlayStation/Saturn know, the PlayStation actually really was very successful simply because it was so easy to damn program for, which really helped to sell it to developers. The Saturn and the N64 were both a bit of a bugger to program, and the N64 had a slightly easier system than the Saturn, but it was plagued with memory issues and a very, very crappy amount of support from Nintendo, and they actually weren't very forthcoming with programming help to developers. And this was a massive issue with N64 fogging, and then you had that was part also of the limitations of the console, but programming issues were definitely an issue, if that made any sense. And the Saturn at the start, because it was launched earlier than what developers had anticipated, Sony basically just had a pretty awesome time with their PlayStation launch, while Sega was struggling because, well, there were issues with the system was launched early, so games were A, rushed, and B, the programming libraries weren't up to scratch, so there was all this mismatch, and it took Sega quite a while, and that's why there was a massive leap between, let's say, Virtua Fighter 1 with very crappy texturing, issues with frame rate, and then look at Virtua Fighter 2, it's almost like it was on a Saturn 2.0, and it was because of different programming advances with the system itself. Now, what is quite interesting about the N64, about the NX, about the N64, God, I've got N64 in my mind, and this is by no means confirmed, just to clarify, but you might be aware that Tegra is becoming a thing in relation to the NX. There are several reports going around that Nintendo have gone with Nvidia to produce the chips, and they are based on the Tegra architecture. However, very interestingly, Nvidia have just announced the Tegra Parker SoC. Now, just to clarify, this is Pascal based. And what's really weird is that there have been reports that Nvidia are not going to be pursuing another Shield tablet. This is something that I didn't actually cover. But they have said that the Pascal SoC will not only power self-driving cars, which is one of the big ones they're really pushing, artificial intelligence and self-driving cars. If you've ever watched any of Nvidia's conferences, you'll know it takes up almost as much time as gaming. But they also say it will deliver great gaming performance with the processor. And they've said, and I quote, "Great single-thread performance, maximize aggregate performance, and sufficient thread count for automotive gaming applications." Moving on from that, there have been some reports that the final version of the NX will actually be using the Pascal-based Tegra. Now, obviously, this is a lot of hearsay, but these rumours, if you take them out of some degree of context and you start adding them all up, there is certainly some argument to be made that we will see the Pascal-based Tegra in the NX, and if so, it means there's going to be quite a jump in horsepower from what we're hearing now. Ultimately, I don't want to report that as confirmed or industry rumours because it's only speculation based on what Nvidia have said. However, there are some reports going around that the NX is actually using a cooling unit for the development system, but unfortunately, the early reports say that it is only using the original version of the K1. However, other reports are saying that they are planning on Pascal, and other reports are saying no, they're not doing that. So, ultimately, keep your mind open, and possibly we will see a big bump in performance, but just be aware that it might not be, and you might get lower end performance what we originally anticipated. As a bit of a bonus, I also want to talk about Microsoft. So, multiple quotes have floated about, and we even reported ourselves that the Scorpio, the Xbox One, the Xbox One S, they all are part of the same console generation, right? Essentially, if you have an Xbox One, the original, yes, you're going to get inferior graphics to, let's say, the Scorpio, but inherently the differences are just that. You're not going to not be able to play, like, let's say, Gears of War 5 when it's finally released, assuming that it is. However, Phil Spencer has taken to Twitter and answered a very simple question. What is next for the Scorpio? You know, is there going to be a successor? Is it going to be the last console of the Xbox? Well, Phil Spencer says already have ideas for what could be after the Scorpio. Great thing in gaming, early tech adopters and best creators in any industry. End quote. Now, it's not very much in terms of information, because really that's something you could take in a dozen different ways. It could be that it could be the Scorpio 2, which is very much backwardly compatible. It could be an entire new console generation. It could be that PC and desktop are going to be almost one and the same. It could be Scorpio is just going to be almost like a streaming service. It could be that they don't feel that they're going to pursue consoles after Scorpio and they're just going to focus on PC. Very doubtful. It could be that they're just going to focus on a certain specific idea of iterative consoles, so there'll be a Scorpio 2, but it's not, at that point you're not going to be able to play games on the original Xbox, but then it turns into like a semi-generation. it really is down to you. But I thought I'd report it and just throw it at the end of this video because it's an interesting discussion piece, if nothing else. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.